Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Jenny Asman. I'm a public finance specialist at UNICEF headquarters, and I will be the moderator for today's event. I'm delighted to welcome you to this Financing for Development side event on the topic of making budgets credible, which is co-hosted by UNICEF and the International Budget Partnership. The way we define budget credibility is the ability of governments to meet the expenditure and revenue targets that have been set out in the budget accurately and consistently. This is obviously not just an administrative issue. If budgets are not implemented as intended, it affects when and how governments can deliver essential services. And this then has impacts on progress in addressing poverty and inequality.
Recording in progress.
And achieving the SDGs. Today we have a rich panel of experts who will be sharing their perspective and insights on the importance of budget credibility, as well as some practical lessons and approaches to enhance the credibility of government budgets. We have a packed agenda with a lot of great ideas to share and discuss. I'm very happy to see we have almost 100 participants who have already joined, and we are hoping that you will be able to also share your ideas with us as we go through the session today. We want to have time for questions and discussions, and so we will get started quickly. First, just a few points of logistics. Today's event has simultaneous interpretation in English and French. If you are in the room, on the microphone console on your desk, you can set the channel to either channel 1 for English or channel 2 to French, and there is a small headset which you can use to hear the language of your choice. If you are joining us online, at the bottom of the screen on Zoom, there is a control marked interpretation, so please select your language here. For our online participants, we also encourage you to take advantage of the chat. Please introduce yourselves, your name, your organization, what country you're joining us from. It would also be great as we go through if you would like to share ideas, examples, things that you're working on, resources that you want to share with the group. We will have experts from International Budget Partnership and UNICEF moderating the chat, and everything that is shared on the chat we will be capturing and sharing with all registered participants after the event, as well as all copies of presentations and a recording of the event. So if we could move to the next slide. So moving to our agenda, you will see we have a number of experts who will be sharing a lot of ideas, but you will also see that we have a Menti link. We would like to use this link to capture questions as we go through the process. So please either sign up using the QR code or enter menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen. As we go through, as you're listening to presenters, if you have a particular question, if you have something you want to raise in the discussion, please enter it straight away so that we can capture this when we move to the discussion. And then just quickly looking at our agenda, we will be starting with experts from International Budget Partnership, UNICEF, UNDESA and UNDP, who will share some perspectives on budget credibility from an institutional perspective. We will then be moving to look at practical approaches that have been applied in country to address budget credibility challenges. And we'll be doing this from the perspective of the Ministry of Finance, from health agency at subnational level, from civil society, and from Audit. And we have 4 countries, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and the Republic of Indonesia. Without any further ado, I'd like to get started. So I will now introduce our first speaker, Ana Patricia Muniz, the Executive Director of International Budget Partnership, to share some initial remarks.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for, I'm trying to see how many, we have close to 150 people watching this now. Thank you for coming early this morning, going through all the hurdles to get to this room. I am Ana Patricia Muñoz, Executive Director of the International Budget Partnership, and we're very grateful to UNICEF for co-hosting this event, and especially for being a fantastic partner throughout these years. IBP is a global nonprofit organization that works with civil society organizations, with academia, with government officials, with the UN system, with multilateral banks to make sure that public money, public funds are spent in an equitable and transparent way. And to do so, it's very important to work in diverse coalitions. And I think the panel today, as Janet described, does exactly that. And you can imagine budget credibility is not a very sexy concept, but actually it has been able to bring together all these different stakeholders, including supreme audit institutions. So we're very happy that the panel today, the results that we have, pretty much reflect the way IBP works and also the way budget credibility has been able to bring people together. Now, throughout the 25 years that IBP has been working on issues of budgeting, we've seen there's been progress in terms of more transparency and accessibility when the budgets are designed, when the budgets are approved, but not the same thing happens when the budgets are implemented. And it has very important consequences, not only because the most vulnerable population are not getting the services they thought they were going to get and they deserve, but also that shatters public trust. And in an environment of polarization and decrease in civic space, this is also very important. So what we did, we've been on this together for 5 years. We started by a bird's eye overview analyzing about 34 countries to see if there was really a problem in over or underspending. That was a desk research. But for us, that's never enough, right? So then we went with CSO's partners, more than 5 partners in 14 countries, to do deeper research on a sectoral basis to understand what was been happening. And then we went even deeper in 5 countries. And you're going to hear from most of them today. And so what we found is that the data that is now available and is even measured by in the SDG 16 is not enough. That we need to get deeper into sector analysis to find what are the real problems and the real solutions. And just to give you some concrete examples, we found, for example, in Senegal, you'll hear from our partner there in more detail, that even in the context of climate crisis, the flood water sanitation budget was underspent by 33%, affecting more than 7 million people. We saw, for example, in Nigeria, you're also going to hear from that, we went deeper not only at the national level, but also the state level, analyzing how the budget was underspent or overspent. As you can imagine, in our research, we found that about 10% of the budgets are underspent, but in lower income countries, that underspending increases to 14%. This means the size of about the entire health budget of many countries. So that's the size of the problem. And I'm providing kind of some context, and maybe let me just end by saying why this is important. When people ask me why I do what I do, I always respond that with a quote that says that societies don't actually invest and change social problems unless they're able to measure them. I think we've been able to measure them, and with the coalitions that we have formed, we have been able to put this on the table and also to make sure that civil society is part of the conversation, not only because civil society and social movements are able to identify how this affects them on the ground. You will hear also examples in Ghana on not only being able to analyze what's been happening at the sectorial level in terms of under or overspending in agriculture, but what's happening with the delivery of fertilizer, for example, and whether women are affected more than men. And we've been able to document all of that. So putting issues on the table, but also identifying what are the actors that have not been brought to the table yet. In the learning event that Jenny and I attended in Kenya, which was really a fantastic place to see all our partners, we saw, for example, the role that national assemblies, congressmen, parliamentarians should play in making sure that what has been promised in terms of implementation of budgets will be done over time, and that governments are accountable also for explaining why those differences happen. So we'll hear the most interesting part next. So I'm going to stop right there. And I also wanted to thank the IBP team who's here and who have been doing this work over 5 years. And there's so much more to do, and we're looking forward to more partnerships in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's an energetic and inspiring start to our discussion. I will now quickly hand to Natalia Windarossi, the Director of Social Policy and Social Protection in UNICEF headquarters, as the fellow co-host of this important event.
Thank you, Ginny. Good morning, good afternoon, buenos dias. Really a pleasure to be here today in this very timely and critical discussion around budget credibility, alongside our longstanding partner, IBP, and also with the endorsement of the INFF facility. But I think most critically, very excited to be joined by a set of experts from countries that are really implementing this critical work. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody on how we really can translate this critical concept into real results for children. The work on budget credibility is a critical pillar of UNICEF's work on public finance for children. This is an area of work that we have further emphasized and elevated in our new strategic plan, which really is trying to make sure that we have the key game changers to reverse many of the setbacks that we've seen as a result of COVID, the climate crisis, conflict, but also the multiple crises that we're experiencing in the last years. Despite the very important progress we saw around poverty and inequality, all of that has been reversed. We've seen an additional 100 million children living in poverty as a result of COVID, climate, and conflict, and really a widening of the financing gap, particularly around social sectors and critical SDGs. This is the moment to really make sure that we have the most innovative approaches, that we gather the key partners, that we are able to address what are the elements that are not allowing us to close that gap. And definitely budget credibility is one of the main, I think, areas and mechanisms that would allow us to accelerate some progress. I think, as Ana Patricia mentioned, this is not a technical or abstract concept. It's definitely a very essential pillar to ensure that development goals, plans, and priorities are translated into concrete actions and concrete results. And of course, from UNICEF perspective, this is particularly crucial for our work on social sectors, on health, education, social protection, and others. We also know that government budgets continue to be one of the main sources of financing of social sectors. And if these budgets are not implemented as intended, this can have a devastating impact in terms of children's rights and their realization, but also on the credibility of critical ministries that are already struggling to have specific and adequate support and adequate financing. And I think that's a very important element of our work in UNICEF, making sure that we work hand in hand with health ministries, education ministries, social development ministries, to showcase how much they know how much is needed, what is the cost, what are the most efficient and effective ways of implementing budgets, and having that very strong case to their counterparts in finance that they can also absorb in a very effective way that work and create the multiplier effects in terms of children's outcomes, but also multiplier effects in the economy and inequality. I think that this is a particular also context because governments are more and more constrained on what they can and cannot do. Their ability to find fiscal space, to prioritize the best interventions is becoming more dire and more difficult. Yes, thank you. And I think is where we can come together and help them to really understand better what are the most efficient ways to show that transparency and that impact. I think in UNICEF, we've been working in many countries hand in hand with governments and many partners, including in civil society, to precisely help governments to strengthen their budget credibility and their ability to showcase those results. We know that there are challenges that are much more broader that sometimes they can handle by themselves, and therefore a big part of the work is also bringing together different parts of capacity at country level from civil society, from private sector, from governments to have to better address the different gaps that we see across the world. And I think that partnership is what allow us to see great changes and critical results at different levels, including at community at subnational level. We sometimes forget that it's not just working at national level, but when we can see a big part of the impact is when we're able to also enhance that capacity of credibility at local government level, at subnational level. I've spoken a lot about government resources, but I think one key part of our work is also the big partnership we have with the INFFs and the important role that we see in those instruments. And I know Tom will go in more detail around that. But it's not just around understanding the problem, but also having a mechanism that would allow some alignment and some proper coordination between the different actors that are working in this regard. I'm getting the red flag, so please conclude.
So fast.
I know, it's just I'm like turning over the pages. Bottom line, this is a key priority for our work. It's a key priority to really ensure that we have an inclusive recovery and really see the results that we want to see in terms of eliminating child poverty, and looking forward to learning from all the key experiences that we see at country level. I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And again, we have this important concept of we need coordination. We need to look at this from multiple perspectives. We need to look at this issue from multiple levels. I am just delighted at the participation we already have online. I'm seeing people from countries, regions all over the world, and from multiple different perspectives. So hopefully in the discussion we can start to bring out some of those ideas. I will now hand on to our next panelist. So I'd like to introduce Peter Chawla, who will be joining us online. Peter is the Economic Affairs Officer at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and will be able to share with us how we see budget credibility reflected in the SDG agenda and also in the most recent flagship report. Peter, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. I hope you can hear me well. We tested this yesterday, but always good to double check. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you, UNICEF colleagues, and for International Budget Partnership for inviting me to join the meeting. My apologies, personal circumstances, I couldn't be there in person, but I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about the broader economic context and analytical work and how this fits in with the focus on budget credibility here. I know you have many colleagues online, and so but in New York this week is the ECOSOC Forum on Financing for Development, which is the main, sort of intergovernmental process for thinking about progress on the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. That's the Financing for Development outcome in 2015 that parallels the 2030 agenda, and talks about really how do we finance what we all want, which is achievement of the SDGs. And there is an interagency task force on FFD, which happily includes UNICEF and many other of the UN system colleagues, and it produces an annual Financing for Sustainable Development report. And so we've highlighted in last year's and this year's report, real concerns about the financing gap that's there. That Natalia referenced that as well, and that's creating challenges for achieving the SDGs. And there's really growing development needs at this time because of some of the global macro context of food price increases and fuel price increases, and at the same time available government resources are sometimes shrinking, at least particularly for long-term investments. And that's a real challenge for countries as they try to move forward on achieving the SDGs. I wanted to raise this year that our FSDR, the Financing for Sustainable Development report, has a thematic chapter every year, and it fits in. We've had now a couple year series where we think about how resources can be delivered to work for development. Last year, we focused on the Great Financing Divide, which really focused on this question of can governments in developing countries raise the resources they need. The cost of borrowing is very high. The cost of raising resources is very high. So we focused on that last year. And this year we focused on now how can resources be invested, and particularly on sort of the industrial side. But I think that conversation is actually really nicely tied in with the way this conversation is happening on budget credibility, because we we talk about scaling up investment in sustainable transformations, how that can really rescue progress in the SDGs, which has been set back. And I think one of the things that it points to is the real need for a couple of things: some state capacity, so that states can use the resources they have better to direct development processes and transformations in society. And there's multiple kinds of transformations. It's not just infrastructure, but it's also human capital. It's also education and health, the kind of transformations we need there. And there's also questions of, as we go through those kind of transformations, people will face insecurity, and that's where some of the kinds of social spending we're talking about today are really critical, to make sure there's appropriate levels of education and retraining, to make sure there's appropriate levels of social protection. Having those elements as part of a package is really important, and that's why it's really critical to have states that are ready to do that. Moving on, I want to go to a couple key messages from the first chapter of the report, which is around domestic public resources. Fiscal system capacity is really important, and that's what we're talking about here today. It's about both the expenditure side and the tax side, and how we can strengthen trust. And I'm really happy that Anna Patricia brought up the issue of the social contract, because it's really important that people who are paying taxes, whether they're paying income taxes or not, whether they're going to be paying some kind of taxes, are receiving services from the state. And that goes to the real heart of the matter of the social contract, and that's really important. And so we've also emphasized in the report over the years the emphasis of planning that relates to these integrated national financing frameworks that you've heard about from Natalia. DESA is one of the partners with UNDP, and you'll hear from Tom more about these tools, which are really important to enhance coherence across policy areas and to think about how we make sure in the long run that government budgets, for example, are really being spent appropriately and effectively on these tools. If you read the FSCR this year, we have some sections on corruption risks, transparency, which are all relevant to this conversation. But I just want to end by saying that very happy that this conversation is happening. Poor budget credibility has direct impacts on public goods and public service delivery, and it's a really important way as we think about scaling up investment in the SDGs to tap every resource that we have available and make sure it's spent effectively. We have to start also on the budget side, as well as working on the tax side to increase resources, working on the lending side to increase the overall fiscal envelope. So budget credibility is a first port of call, but not the only. And I really look forward to the discussion that follows, to hearing some of the country experiences about how to make sure that budgets are spent effectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was really great to see the critical issue of budget credibility reflected so clearly in the latest FSDR. And of course, with a recommendation about potential tools such as integrated national financing frameworks, which is a fantastic segue to our next speaker. I would now like to introduce Tom Bello, the Chief of Program for the UNDP Sustainable Financing Hub. Please, Tom.
Great, thanks, Jenny, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Tom Bello, and indeed I work for UNDP in our Sustainable Finance Hub, and also working with UNICEF, with UNDESA, OECD, and with the support of Sweden, European Union, Italy, and Spain to support the integrated national financing framework agenda at the country level through the INFF facility. I just want to take a quick sort of step back, and a lot of the discussion, the sort of exciting discussion that we have around the FFD forum, and of course last week also at the spring meetings of the bank and the IMF, is around the unlocking of private capital for sustainable development. We hear these trillion-dollar figures, the ever-increasing global wealth, I think now over $460 trillion of wealth that, we're desperately trying to capitalize on for sustainable development. But really, public finance is the backbone upon which that unlocking will take place. And even within public finance, which may seem narrow when we think about those big figures, there is, over the next 3 years, $56 trillion that will be spent through public expenditure in developing countries. So it's a huge amount of money as well. So, really the foundations of financing for sustainable development reside in public finance. Now, of course, credible budgets are critical in that context. And credibility is not policy agnostic. I want to make that point very forcibly, because PFM reform processes cannot be policy neutral. We need to ensure, as we take forward PFM reform processes, we are integrating sustainable development and the SDGs into those reform processes. This is what the UN brings, which is different to some of the other actors in the international finance architecture. And it's in that context that we are working around integrated national financing frameworks. The word integration is not simply across different financial flows, it's an integration of sustainable development into those financial flows. And just to demonstrate the win-win, I think, which is kind of obvious to taking that policy-directed approach to PFM reform, frankly, we've seen how PFM reform programs have faltered and continued over decades to try and achieve that more performance-oriented approach. It's slow. We need to build momentum. Bringing sustainable development into PFM reform programs brings a whole new set of constituencies to the agenda which can build that momentum. But vice versa, it also allows us to accelerate progress on sustainable development, which is really the challenge of our time. Let me just light on a couple of country examples. I know the real excitement will be on the presentations that follow from our country colleagues. But again, just to look at some of the scale we're talking about. Countries such as Colombia, Uzbekistan, and many others, 30 or so others, have looked at how to integrate the SDGs and or climate change and other dimensions of the SDGs into their budget process. I know in Colombia that between 2021 and 2022, the overall budget increased from $75 to $84 billion. The proportion of the spend on SDGs increased from 56 billion of that 75 in 21 to 61 billion of that 84 in 22. So there was an increase in the expenditure on SDGs of $5 billion. Now, this is just scraping the surface. We obviously need more evidence and analysis of both the impact of that expenditure as well as the authenticity and the credibility of that expenditure being aligned with the SDGs. But it's a very important start, because without that start, we couldn't even have the conversation about how increasing public expenditure aligns with the SDGs in Colombia. But budgets do not stand alone, and I just want to give 3 examples in my 2 minutes left of how we also need to look at how budgets interface with other dimensions of finance. Clearly, we need to look at tax policy and revenue. We cannot look at budget policy alone. We know that if you have a progressive taxation system, let's take the example of gender equality, all the right policies in place regarding tax, but then are not spending in line with those gender equality objectives, it's quite possible that you're regressing progress on gender equality. We cannot look at budgets alone. And again, within the integrated national financing framework, we're trying to look with countries at how tax policy, revenue administration, and budget policy and public expenditure can be looked at as a whole. And it doesn't stop there. We need to look at how budgets relate to debt. How can we ensure that debt relief, that debt instruments such as SDG bonds are credibly using budgets to align use of proceeds with SDG projects and programs? This, again, is an area that requires more scrutiny. Uzbekistan issued an SDG bond that was tagged through its budget $235 million. It's a fantastic achievement for Uzbekistan. But again, that we've only just started to understand the impacts of those use of proceeds. And we really need to work together across state and non-state actors to analyse that further. Final example in my remaining minute is, of course, we do need to get back to unlocking private capital. And budget classification systems, alignment of public finance with sustainable development cannot be looked at divorced from how governments are taking forward policy and regulation around sustainable finance taxonomies for the private sector. Again, a classification system, but this time for private capital. How do public financial classifications and private investment classifications come together around a coherent, sustainable finance architecture at the country level? We could explore examples in Colombia, the Philippines, and Mongolia, who are looking at those aspects of their integrated national financing framework. Last piece, just to advertise that the Integrated National Financing Framework Facility is there to support governments and civil society in their endeavours to construct credible, sustainable finance architectures at the country level. We were discussing with various civil society representatives yesterday, as well as the day before, how is it that we can engage through the facility with civil society to ensure that we have credible and authentic systems for tracking finance against sustainable development progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. So many rich points in such a short period of time. But one of the key takeaways for me is that if we can increase the credibility of government budgets, not only can we increase the impact of the funds that are available, but it gives governments greater opportunities to crowd in other sources of funding. It increases their ability to access credit. It makes it more likely that they can raise money for an SDG bond because they can demonstrate the impact that they can achieve with those funds. And of course, in the current fiscal environment, every dollar counts. So budget credibility is really about maximising what we can do with what we have. I know a lot of people have joined us online and in the room, so just very quickly, for people joining us online, we are encouraging you to introduce yourselves in the chat, and just to highlight that a number of resources have been shared in relation to INFFs, the FSDR. And for people who are joining us currently now, just to highlight, we will have simultaneous interpretation. There should be a headset, channel 1 for English, channel 2 for French, and people joining us online, the option for interpretation is at the bottom of your screen. Now, Tom very helpfully brought up some really practical examples on what can be done with a tool such as integrated national financing frameworks. Given we have more than 210 people online and so many countries are working on integrated national financing frameworks, if there's anyone currently engaged in this, please share your experience. Please put some ideas in the chat. But we're now moving on to the agenda where we start to hear about some of the processes that are underway at country level to specifically address these challenges. And I'm particularly delighted that we're going to have the opportunity to talk about SDG budgeting, which is a tool that I know we have a lot of interest in. And we're very fortunate to have a representative of the government of Ghana here to share their experience. Ghana has been a leading voice in this agenda. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Nanayor Minta Botwe, who is the head of the Budget Technical Assistance and Support Unit in the Ministry of Finance from the Government of Ghana. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great time to be here to share insights and also hear much on what is being done. Thomas raised very, very interesting insights as he shared his presentation as well. So Ghana has actually also been doing a lot of work with support from some of our partners, to mention just UNICEF Ghana, to partner us in delivering some of our budget reports as well. We have presented actually 4, working on the 5th one now. Why would we actually want to do this? I hear around the table about a lot of transparency, accountability, sharing information, service delivery. So after we presented our first budget report, we noticed that most of the allocations that had been made was almost not impossible to actually track, to know if these resources that have been allocated were going to achieve the various goals and targets that we have actually outlined in our various policies as well. So we had to now go around as to how do we now make this process more transparent, make this process more efficient, be able to track these resources from when resources are being allocated to when spending actually happens. How are we able to measure? How are we able to link this to other indicators and give a measure and know if you are achieving the impact that we want? Then we actually moved on to now having a methodology which now looks at integrating these SDG targets into our national chart of account. The chart of account actually is a listing of all the codes using the general ledger of an entity, which means that we had to even update our financial systems in line with this new methodology that we have. Having done this, going through the process of trying to do this and being able to now do this, we got to a point where we are now able to now allocate resources to the various SDG targets and goals alongside our national policies, which meant that we could now know and share with all citizens where our budget is always presented online. We share this information. So all citizens now can now pick the budget and be able to say that, okay, this is how much you're allocating towards a particular goal, a particular target, and be able to know the various activities or actions that have been aligned to these various goals and targets. And after we have actually done this, then the questions were raised: how sure are we that this spending that we have actually, these allocations actually as we've made, the spendings actually follow the same thoughts and actions and policies that we have actually outlined. So we now had to move from just allocations and sharing insights, these allocations, and now going ahead to now look at the actuals, the spending, to see are we getting the results. Now this actually opened a different door to us because now we're able to now look at if the resources that have been allocated, was it enough? Is it actually meeting the targets that we actually would want to actually have as well? So what we have now been able to do as part of our tagging process is that in the first step, we have aligned all our SDG targets to the various policies in our chart of account. So in Ghana, across all the levels of government, that is the national and sub-national, every allocation that is made is actually tagged to an SDG target, which can be aggregated to a goal and also to a national focus area as well. And after this is done, it makes it possible to now allocate resources to the various targets and then also identify actions, tasks, and activities that we want to undertake to achieve these targets from the SDGs and also the national policies as well. By doing this, what we have been able to achieve is that across all levels of government, we are now able to even identify the focus for which the allocations are being made, to now be able to see and prioritize to see that are we actually meeting these targets by the allocations that have been made. Often at times, you might notice that there's some bits of differences between how the allocations are made and how they are spent as well. So in the other subsequent process, what we do is that we are now able to extract all the data across all levels of government, from national to sub-national, using our financial systems and no manual means. Our financial systems is able to now provide us information across all levels of government. So the discussion now for us to be able to see if the resource that we have to meet a certain target or goal is enough. It's now open here. So we are now able to now make data-based arguments from the perspectives of data. We are now able to see if the resources coming in are enough. We are able to identify the financial gaps, and some of these points I think have been raised earlier with Thomas. So from here, we are able to now prepare our report. Some practical considerations that we might have to share with you will be that we now have been able to align all the SDGs to our national priorities and track them across all levels of government. Tagging them with the budget codes allow for easy and transparent tracking. It allows you to be able to share the information to improve your transparency and also be able to report easily across all levels to all persons, regardless of where these persons are placed. It allows for easy monitoring and also, as I mentioned, reporting as well. By doing this, we have been able to improve transparency on our budgets and also now be able to identify some of the financial gaps we might also have. It has also improved our execution capacity to also now look at how these resources are being spent, if they are actually in line with the various allocations as made. But to be able to achieve all this, we need to always have in mind the mandate, some of the mandates and the core functions of the various stakeholders who are within this this ecosystem, because they also have some challenges or some means of reporting when it comes to the national reporting. So for Ghana, putting this as part of the chart of accounts, that's the budget codes, has improved our reporting in that now we are able to now report to all stakeholders and also share this information to all stakeholders in line with some of the mandates of some of the institutions that we actually have as part of government machinery as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this example. It is really exciting. I know there's a lot of countries that are working on SDG budgeting, but many of them are working on this at allocation level only. And when you're looking at allocation, it's important, obviously. It helps with prioritization, and with better prioritization, that can improve your ability to execute, and it can improve your budget credibility. But monitoring the execution, monitoring the implementation, it allows you to look for efficiencies in real time. I mean, the system that Ghana has, it's obviously not something that every country has, that system, that capacity, the ability to be able to track that at national and subnational level. But it's a really inspiring example. I, again, would just like to encourage any other person who's joined us online to please share any work you're doing on SDG budgeting in the chat. It would be great to learn more about the current status of work in this area. And I would now like to switch to our next speaker. So we are moving from a Ministry of Finance perspective to the social sectors. And I'm very happy that we have the subnational perspective here. Getting funds to the front line is, of course, one of the key goals of the budget. We need to ensure that we're delivering these critical services in order to make progress on our key goals, to address poverty, to address inequality. And it's subnational governments who play this essential role. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to welcome Dr. Mutine Babatunda Olatunji, the Executive Secretary of Oyo State Primary Healthcare Board in Nigeria. Dr. Olatunji, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and nice for having me. It's quite interesting to share ideas across boards. And like you already stated, that what happened at the subnational level, and specifically now at the health sector, primary healthcare level, and been the foundation for health service delivery in the country. And if you could recall, from the Alma Ata Declaration of 1979 that says that PHC, primary care service delivery, should be the first point of call that should be very strong in having a robust healthcare service delivery in the country. Nigeria now looking at a way to enhance budgetary provision for health service delivery by the WHO provision, a minimum of 50% of the total budget of the country, the state, of the local government should be able to evolve towards a sustainable primary care system, which unfortunately in the time past has not been the story in the country. So to be able to go beyond this, the country evolved a national health law, which was signed in 2014, whereby we now created a primary healthcare board that will be able to help us in channeling funds into the sustainability of the health care service delivery in the country. And by that provision in the law, we have a minimum of 1% of the consolidated revenue of the federal government devolved towards supporting primary health care service delivery. Not only that one again, we have revenue from the donors and other partners, then even including taxation and individual that can contribute into that basket fund to be able to service primary healthcare service delivery. In getting this done is the provision as a part of accountability framework. Each state of the federation that will be able to tap into this budgetary support from the federal government must give a commitment counterpart fund into the larger fund. For instance, in Oyo State, about 100 billion naira was provided to be able to qualify to be part of the funding system that will be able to support primary healthcare service delivery in the country. And with this, to be able to access this fund, you must be able to provide the framework. What are the frameworks that you need to do to ensure credibility and transparency? Is that there must be a primary healthcare board in each state of the federation that will be structured in the way that will be so independent. Not only that one again, it will be technically driven by a professional that will be a little bit secluded from the political interference so that it can allow for seamless operation in the running of the system. So in Oyo State specifically, we established the primary care board in 2015. And since then, we'll be able to harness those funds. Now, the fund that will now come from the treasury single account to the state is not just to stay there and just be tampered with it. We evolve another mechanism, which we call DFL, direct facility funding. So you will be able to push this fund from the state government down to the facility. And again, the local government as well for the state government must be able to contribute into this basket. And it's a tripartite arrangement whereby the federal government will contribute, the state government will contribute, and the local government will contribute. Everything comes under the primary healthcare under single roof. But when the fund comes to service at the facility level, it has to go to the facility as a form of direct facility funding. Now, at the facility level, another way of ensuring transparency is the fact that we have, we have a ward health system in the country, whereby each ward coalesces to form the local government coalesces to form the state. So in each of the political wards, now we have something we refer to as the ward development committees. These are the members of the community that this health service is meant to benefit or serve. So they constitute a committee. A member of the committee will become the chairman of that development committee. Then the officer in charge of the facility becomes the secretary to the World Development Committee. And then you can now have an insight into the working and the spending at the primary healthcare level. Then we even collaborate with other partners, that non-governmental organization. Among the list is the JDPC, they have been working very strongly with us. We have other voluntary organizations that reside within those communities, and they are part and parcel of the structure. Now, how do we ensure that the funding is targeted and is spent in the way it is designed? For each facility, before they can start accessing the fund or spending it, what they need to do is to develop a business plan for the facility. What are the business plan they are going to develop is to be able to assess their own need. There is a difference between the felt need and the perceived need. So it is the felt need of the facility themselves that will now be enhanced. So the facility, in conjunction with a member of the community, now we now design a work plan that will now be sent back to the primary care board for vetting and approval. Now, when fund comes, they are now guided to spend based on the work plan, so that you are sure that as is a form of project tracking. So you are sure that whatever is put at the doorstep or at the funding of a particular activity is actually utilized for those specific facility. And there is no room for veering off from the intended project or intervention that needs to be done at that level. So with that, we seem to have a very robust edge funding system. In the past, the state and the country had roughly between 4 to 5% as edge budgets year in, year out. Now, with this structure now, we are able to galvanize funds to primary healthcare service delivery. And for instance, Oyo State is edging close to 10% budget funding for the health sector, which is closer to 50% stipulated by the World Health Organization. So with this robust budget funding, it allows creativity and involvement of the member of the community. It gives leverage and power to the facility head at the grassroots, so that they can actually come in and be able to partake in what will ensure the success of health service delivery in the community. Now, there's another check and balance. The federal has a role to play in coming back to look at the books and check what are the things you actually proposed, how much of the funding have you been able to do, then how well have you been able to align with the rules and regulations that are stated in clarity for you. So if you don't do this, you won't be able to qualify for the next tranche of funding. Another arms of funding that is so much enshrined now in the basic healthcare provision fund is the health insurance component. There are 3 components in this health funding system. We have the primary healthcare gateway, we have health insurance or social health insurance gateway, then we have for medical emergencies. Now, the component of the health insurance gateway is to leverage on what we have on the basic healthcare gateway for the facility. Now, each facility now needs to look at the vulnerable groups in the community. With the help of the member of the community, they identify people line and other children under 5 and the aged ones. Now, they will not be enrolled into the health insurance scheme from that funding that is coming from the federal government and which the state government has contributed to. Now, it will now form the source of capitation for all those the vulnerable groups. So what now happens, they will not be empaneled into each of the primary healthcare facility in their domain. So access to care is now enhanced. Out-of-pocket expenditure for them is now removed. Then you can see a sustainable funding for primary healthcare services in such a structure. So you have a collaboration between the State Health Insurance Agency and the Primary Healthcare Board to be able to put a lot of funding into the basket of health service delivery. And the vulnerable in the community can now have a maximal benefit in this kind of a arrangement. So with this, we open our gateway and our book to other members of the community, the non-governmental organizations, apart from the government in their own structure. Then we encourage the private sector to be able to contribute into this sector again. And because they have seen transparency, so it makes it easier for them to contribute into the basket, and which it cannot be utilized to service the health service. And that's not even excluded for the kind of huge investment the government.
I'm sorry, Dr. Olatunji, could I get you to bring your remarks to a close, and we can go further into some of these issues
with this,
in discussion.
we have a very kind of a robust funding structure that is working for the state. And I think with this, we are good to go to see it on the positive trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry we had to draw you short, but we have 2 more speakers, and we want to have time to really get into the discussion of some of these issues. And you brought up so many important points, which I hope we'll be able to move into when we come to the questions and the discussion. So obviously, you're setting up these governance structures which allow both flexibility and accountability, and this really strong giving the level of control and leadership to the facility level and providing greater opportunities for community involvement. These are really important themes. And it's also a great segue to our next speaker. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into the critical role of community participation and engagement in budget implementation. So this is our second last speaker. I'd just like to remind people that please do start to put your questions into Menti. as we're going through the different speakers. You can also write into Menti if you have a particular example of your own that you would like to share with the group. The Menti code, for those who don't have it, 3503-7167. I would now like to welcome our next speaker, Margaret Diouf, who is the Program Coordinator of Urbacen in Senegal. Margaret will be delivering her remarks in French, so for those people in the room, please use your headsets. If you don't have a headset in front of you, please come to another desk. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret, can you hear me? You have the floor.
Oui, je vous entends. Bonjour.
Yes, I can hear you. Good morning. I'm Margaret Diouf Cissé. I'm from Unicef, Senegal. We work mostly on issues of sanitation, access to sanitation services in informal areas in the city. These informal, like slums that are organized in a spontaneous way, like shanty towns in the city. So mostly population who don't have access to the basic services. So these are areas where we meet different group of people. So this sanitation network are not really built in terms of flow of water, wastewater, and all those kind of waste management. So this population are exposed to some issues of health and so on and so forth. So over 80% of households don't have latrines, don't have adequate infrastructures. So they are in an area with groundwater, which is like 2 meter depth. So these households live in neighborhoods without clean water. Their wastewater is thrown on the streets directly, and the rain waters cannot be evacuated in appropriate areas in these heights in these areas. So in terms of sanitation, to support the local governments, so we conduct activities, mapping activities on the flooding areas that are likely to be flooded when there is heavy rains. So we provide support to the local governments in these areas on sanitation issues. Identification also through this mapping process to map all those existing networks. I mean, the pumping station and water cleaning stations, purification stations for water. So through this mapping, we identify existing infrastructures, and mostly through funding, the semi-collective management system of this water, of this rain water, through urban renewable fund managed jointly by Urbacen with the other entity, the Fédération Sénégalaise of Africa. It's an organization, community-based organization living in the areas where we intervene in the community. So they sometimes the chief of the community leader, they are the elected people, that locally elected. Sometimes we also have a deputy to the mayors in the areas, and we also provide co-financing through those entities. We also conduct data collection campaigns. It was not our approach at the beginning, but with this IBP support, we are focusing on budget, communal or municipal budgets, and we support the members of this federation, of this community, in terms of participatory budgeting. So we train them in terms of this aspect so that the municipality can be affected through this work, and everything to be done jointly, collectively, in terms of sanitation aspects and issues and management. As regard budget credibility, Urban Sen work with the International Budget Partnership in terms of sanitation. We are conducting a rapid assessment these past years, and it has proven that sanitation in Senegal is facing many challenges in terms of budget cuts and so on and so forth. And budgets are evolving, are changing. The trend is downward, it's going down, it's decreasing. So it is dying, it is being revised, reviewed, and it has been reduced 2021, 2022. Other challenge, lack of coordination in terms of investment, sanitation, which tremendously affect the allocation of the budget, leading to lack of harmonization between the investment structures in coordination or in line with the basic needs of the beneficiaries on the ground. So they don't take into account some geographical specificity of informal, neighborhood like the slums or the shanty towns I mentioned earlier. So number of programs in place lack performance. Households don't have access to water canalization system in place for these projects, and the collectivity, the community, and local government of the state-owned entities ask for appropriation.
So Yobersen with IPB, commits to meet the people in charge at the level of government, to have to have a better access to a solution and to better habitat to and housing for people who have a right to life and to living properly. So this is what we do with this approach for support to basic community services for the development of a sanitation system in those neighborhoods that are been set up in an informal way and are often forgotten by the elected officials and the program of sanitation management. And these people have a right to those services and are ready to co-fund them with their own fundings and with the support of our organization. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Margaret. This is a really compelling example of the impact of improving community participation and how it can address budget credibility challenges, both related to the design and the delivery of programs. It can be challenging to establish this type of collaboration between government agencies and civil society, but I think this shows what is possible. And I can see from Menti that we've already had a number of questions about how can civil society have the opportunity to engage on this agenda with different bodies, different levels of government, different mechanisms of coordination. So thank you for sharing these reflections, and I expect we'll have more discussions specifically on this issue when we move to discussion. We are now moving to our final speaker, and can we have the speaker's slides presented on the screen, please? I am very happy to introduce our next speaker. We have seen very strong participation and interest from supreme audit institutions on how the audit system and processes can be used to strengthen budget credibility. So we're very fortunate to have with us today Mr. Topan Aji Pratama, who is a senior auditor from the Audit Board of the Republic of Indonesia. Indonesia has done a lot of work on connecting budget credibility with the implementation of and achievement of the SDGs. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a little bit of your work. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, in this good opportunity, let me thank to the IBP for inviting BPK to be one of speakers in this precious event. And on behalf of BPK, I would like to thank and very honored to be here, to sit down with the other speakers. And I would like to share our experience in promoting and assessing budget credibility as well as the SDGs auditing in Indonesia. Okay, next please. Okay, just to give you a brief illustration of legal framework in the Indonesia context. So, a credible national budget provides a roadmap to effective service delivery and to the achievement of the long-term national objectives such as the SDGs. However, currently there is no such a single and explicit definition on when we can call a budget is credible or not. In Indonesia context, we can see that the budget credibility characteristic on the provision of Law 17 year 2003 as how the state finance should be managed. This should be in an orderly manner, in compliance with laws and regulation, efficiently, economically, effectively, and transparent, responsible with all due regard to a sense of fairness and propriety. And all these government activities are put together in the medium-term national development plan at PGMN and annual planning and budgeting. For the SDGs, there were 94 SDG targets have been mainstreamed in the 2015 to 2019 our medium-term national development plan, and now they were increased to 124 in 2020 and 2024 RPJMN. So that's the mandate for the BPK to carrying the management and accountability audit of the state finance. Okay, next. Okay, I would like to share our BPK experience on how BPK audits in the area of budget credibility and SDGs. It's starting from in 2015, we conducted the performance audit on state budget preparation. What we found during this audit, there's no alignment between the planning and budgeting process. So the government still in silos when doing their function, especially for the planning function and the budgeting function. And based on our audit, the government issued the government regulations that concerning about the alignment of the planning and budgeting process. And the government has already considered tax policies while budgeting for tax revenue. And in 2018, we also conducted a performance audit on the quality expenditure management using a performance-based budgeting framework. So based on this result, we found that there is no clear definition and clear understanding about the quality expenditure. So currently, the government has been developing the quality expenditure definition and has been improving budget execution performance indicator and improving performance evaluation on budgeting. And the last one, in 2021, we also conducted a specific purpose audit. So when we look at the mandate for the BPK, we can conduct three types of audit: the financial audit, a performance audit, and specific purpose audit. So we try to utilize all of these type of audits to do this budget credibility assessment. For the SDGs audit area, we have done three types of audit. The first one, in the early implementation of the SDGs, we have done the audit of the preparedness of the government of Indonesia to implement the SDGs. And based on our finding, we found that there is a data disintegration. So the government come up with the President Regulation number 39 concerning Satu Data Indonesia. Satu means one data Indonesia. So why one data Indonesia is important? Because it's intended to create government data governance with the aim of realizing data that is accurate, up-to-date, integrated, and accountable, and easily accessible and shared between stakeholders. The data is expected to be the basis for development planning, implementation, evaluation, and control. And after the audit and the preparedness, we did the audit on the SDGs implementations. And finally, in 2021, we did the VNR. The VNR, the Voluntary National Report, is considered as the first VNR audit in the world conducted by Supreme Audit Institutions. Okay, next. From our audit experience, I would like to share challenges when we conducted the audit. The first one, there's a multi-stakeholders, and in the Indonesian perspective, the geographical condition is such a challenge for us because, you may know that Indonesia is consists of 17,000 islands, and it's quite so many. And the data location in many ministries and institutions the data is spread out in the government institutions, and the effectiveness of the follow-up recommendation. When we deliver a recommendation, we have to manage and we have to monitor how the follow-up conducted by the government. And challenges we found that the last one is about how to connecting budget credibility with implementation and achievement of the SDGs, because it is in this session it is still a big question and a big challenging for us, including for BPK, to manage how the budget credibility will improve the implementation of achievement of the SDGs. Actually, in our strategic planning for each 5-year strategic planning, we have aligned our audit program with the government's program, including the program that directly correlate with the SDGs implementation. So, where there are two kind of audits, there's a dedicated audit for the SDGs and embedded SDGs audits. And for the audit tools, I would suggest that we, as for SAI, to develop its big data analytics, because when we talk about the SDGs, when we talk about the budget credibility, there's multi-stakeholders and the data is spread out the government institution. And with big data analytics, I could say that it will make the auditors easier to make a plan when to make a plan to do the audit, because we can focus on the risky areas based on the big data analytics. And last but not least, is about the institutional development. It's always important for the SAI to do the institutional development, because we require the whole of government approach, continuous capacity building, including joining in the community. And as like we do now, we are currently joining the team who developed the budget credibility handbook sponsored by the IPP and UNDESA. And I will say that this handbook could be useful for the SAI to assessing their government budget credibility. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of our panelists for their fantastic and inspiring remarks. We have a lot of questions that have come through, and sadly, I don't think we're going to have enough time to cover them all. What I would like to suggest is that, in particular, where we've got questions for a particular panelist, we will be asking our panelists to give us some brief notes, and we'll be sharing that with all participants. So please don't hesitate to keep sending your questions in, and we'll hopefully be able to continue this conversation. We will be sending out copies of the recording, copies of the presentations, and all the resources, ideas, and examples that have been shared in the chat. So please keep this up. We will have to, unfortunately, draw to a close in 17 minutes, but this will not be the end of the process. What I would propose for our remaining minutes is I will try and group together some of the questions that have come in. I can see that we definitely have a lot of interest in SDG budgeting. There is interest in this question of big data that you just mentioned, Mr. Prathama, and there is multiple questions in relation to engagement of CSOs and the creation of sustainable systems, as well as some quite specific questions on methodology. Let me start by directing a question. If Nana Minta, if I could give you 3 minutes to share some very brief remarks on the topics of the use of budget codes and classification and any suggestions you would have. We can also share resources afterwards, so just a very quick remark on this. And also how CSOs can engage in the process, including in planning and monitoring and evaluation. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. The use of budget codes allows you to really have a direct allocations as he mentioned from the last.
I'm sorry, we may have an issue with sound. Can people hear Minta, or is it just my system?
We can hear. Okay, so the use of budget codes means that all allocations in line with the preparation of the budget, all the allocations that are made in allocating resources, these codes are used. And the moment these codes are used as part of your preparation of the budget means that, and they are in the financial system, means that you are able to now use a single code or to track more codes, especially as we've done for the SDG codes. What we did was that we needed to engage all stakeholders. There are some entities of government who are mandated to report on all government policies. As part of this, all these government policies have already been coded into the national budget or the national financial system that we have. So what happens is that after you engage all these stakeholders, you are able to identify how they are mandated to report and what they have to report on and how they're actually achieving this. Then you'll be able to now pick the various policies of government and also do this alignment. In Ghana's case, the policy document we have has already been aligned with the SDGs and the AU Agenda 2063 as well. So now having them coded in the financial system brings the flexibility and brings the ease to now be able to now track all these resources across all levels. Now, it is not just about the code. It also brings you insight, further insight as to how resources are even being allocated across all levels of government. We are now being able to identify the focus of a particular subnational government for a period of, say, 4 years now, to know if the resources they are allocating, their patterns of allocating resources is changing or is being met. It is through this same allocation methodology that we're able to identify that resources to a particular goal like gender was not enough. We were able to now, with partnership from UNICEF Ghana, be able to hold other engagements to be able to now identify what could be done, what we could do, as to finding out the challenges to why this resource being allocated to set a certain goal like gender was that minimal. From this, we're able to identify what the challenge was, and we noticed that after this, there has been an increase in the allocation to goal 5 of gender. Now, when it comes to Ghana system and sharing or involving the civil society, as part of our budget preparation process, we engage the civil society, we engage all groups that we possibly we can, and we also make ads in the dailies to also invite inputs into the budget. After this, we are able to also present the budget reports. We are able to put online. We are able to also turn these budget reports into other languages. All the languages are available or spoken in Ghana to also share or distribute so that every other person is able to have a look at what is going in the budget. But we are also in another discussion to see how we can make the primary data to some of these infographics we have in the SDG available to academia, available to our partners, civil society. So we are very much in discussion with one of our key partners, UNICEF Ghana here, to be able to now see if we can have a dashboard where some of this information is shared. Some of this information is readily available for integration into other systems to also allow some of our partners to do further analysis as to maybe identifying some financial gaps and others. All this is currently being done in Ghana as well. So this will be my response to the question as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and apologies, I gave you two questions, which makes it a more complicated answer, but thank you for that very detailed and very clear additional information. I'm afraid we have 10 minutes remaining, so we will not be able to cover all the questions that we have. What I will be asking is I will have two more questions, and I will ask our panel members to be very brief in their remarks, and we'll expand further with written feedback, which we'll share to all registered participants. So first of all, I will have one very quick question, Mr. Topan, in relation to, is there possibility for joint audit between BPK Indonesia and CSOs in relation to SDGs? We also have some specific questions in relation to your work, which I'll be following up on and asking you to share, which we will share in writing. I will then ask Margaret if she can share some very brief reflections on what she found the entry points were to building these engagements with government and what led to the successful interaction that is now underway. And then I will pass to Dr. Olatunji for some final remarks in relation to both CSO engagement and sustainability. I will come on and tap the microphone when you've hit 3 minutes. So very quick remarks, please, and then we'll close. Mr. Topan.
Yeah, thank you for the question. For the joint audit, I think I should coordinate with my the external affair in my office, because as I know, it is BPK has now more resources to this audit, and BPK has also send their auditor to another SII to to do the joint audit there, to make like a secondment there to gain knowledge and experience from the more advanced SII and back into BPK to do this audit. But I think it's quite a good question, because now it's time for maybe for BPK to share their knowledge, share their experience to conduct when in conducting this type of audit with other SAI members. I think that's quite good. But unfortunately, I cannot answer this precisely because I have to ask with the respective divisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And of course, this is an evolving process, and we are still learning different ways that we can address budget credibility within each of the different institutions, and also how the institutions can work together. So I think we're all asking questions that we don't necessarily have answers to, but I'm so happy that we have this community together and we can look at different ways of taking this forward. And you also mentioned, of course, the handbook that is coming out on how Supreme Audit institutions can address budget credibility. So this is an exciting new publication, and I think it will also provide more information on this area. So very quickly now, if I can hand to Magat for some very quick reflections on what you see and what you would recommend in relation to building this relationship between civil society, communities and government. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. The community-based organization we are working with, are at the heart of the whole process. They conduct the different exchanges with the authorities in charge of sanitation issue or government authorities. They are those in touch with them. They conduct social audit. They do data collection so as to put it into take into account in management of public affairs, and they are integrated in the decision-making process. They sign convention with local governments. They also sign some convention with the Directorate of Sanitation in the country and in this level in the neighborhood. They have at their disposal a fund which is financed by different donors. We have local governments, even state-owned entities co-finance actually the activities to conduct this work. The inhabitants also have some little contribution, so we involve all the organizations, all these stakeholders, as well as local governments, mobilize part of the budget to provide and help do some work to provide basic social services in the neighborhoods. So to come in to do them on time, and have more visibility on the budget aspect, more transparency, and these are all aspects we take into account. Thank you. I hope you have covered all aspects of the question.
Thank you. That was a fantastic response and another example of building systems. And it depends in your individual context what that system looks like and how that system is formalized. But something like a memorandum of understanding, creating a structure, a system, and obviously having some resources to undertake some of these critical activities such as social audit, social monitoring, it can offer real returns in terms of identifying and addressing some of these budget credibility challenges on the ground and improving these critical services. So for final remarks, I will now hand over to Dr. Olatunji. Dr. Olatunji, I hope you can hear me and your system is working. If I could ask you just for within 3 minutes, your reflections, in particular drawing on these issues of sustainable systems and the question of coordination across multiple stakeholders, including CSOs. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. One part of the quick reflection I can get from this is the fact that we all seem to have a common denominator when it comes to budgeting, which is it's said that budget is often planned, but not well implemented as planned. And we talk so much about the budget poor implementation, which has a negative impact on development overall. We can get now, we can have a countrywide decrease in resources that tends to have impact on our implementation at the end of the day. That will have impact on the sustainable development or the set goals that we need to have. So to be able to get this one, we need to have a robust tax structure to be able to put more funds for budgeting. Then we need to have transparency, which have to key into our framing so that there will be much more confidence in other people to play a much more critical role in what we set out to design. Then there's a need for a nexus between the public and private sector for resource mobilization and for effective financing towards a sustainable development. The budget line can be codified as a line budget, and then you can enhance transparency and be able to follow through what we have. Community engagement is another critical factor that we need to strengthen so that all major stakeholders can get involved in our budgeting and can build confidence around it. So with this, I think we can have a much more transparent budgeting, and we can have much more resources to be able to mobilize, and we can have a positive impact on the global scale for sustainable development across boards. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are at time. So on behalf of UNICEF and International Budget Partnership, I would like to thank you so much for joining us for this event today. But in particular, I would like to extend, obviously, an invitation. This is a discussion. We've shared a lot of ideas. We saw from the questions that there's still new areas to explore and there's still a lot of experiences to share. So all people who registered for the event, we will be reaching out with material. Please do continue to share questions and examples, and that will make the information we share that much richer. I would like to thank our esteemed panelists. I would like to thank our skilled translators, and I would like to thank the technicians who brought this event together. If I can have a moment of thanks and gratitude to our panelists, both here and online, for joining us, and all participants who took the time out of their busy schedule to be with us. Thank you so much.